Unit 12, ABAP Runtime. Lesson, Advanced Selection Screens. Lesson Overview. This lesson provides an overview of the options for creating complex selection screens. Business example. You want to create a more complex selection screen to filter your data selection and create more personalized reports. Selection screen properties. We're going to create a program that uses the following properties of a selection screen. We're going to learn how to add buttons on the selection screen. We're going to learn how to define radio buttons, define checkboxes, define screen text. We're going to create a select options with obligatory parameters. We're going to disable an object in the selection screen. We're going to hide or show an object, and we're going to display blue color parameters. Let's log into the system and create a program using advanced selection screen properties. So inside the system, let's go to the object navigator and let's create a program in our ABAP course that is going to be called C complex selection screen without the top include. This will be a example program for complex selection screens. Executable program, and we save. Now, in this example, I am going to show you selection screen properties. So, I was copying and pasting this for you. So I'm going to show you how to add buttons on the selection screen, define radio buttons, define checkboxes, screen text, select options with obligatory parameters, disable and hide show an object, and display blue color parameters. So first, we're going to start by defining some tables that we're going to use in our program. So we define the following tables. We're going to use the SCR fields to control the screen elements. We're going to declare a data type. So begin off. Occurs. I'm going to declare an internal table here with the following options. This is a table I'm using, and it's all going to contain also this parameter. So let's just type everything that I'm typing, so I can explain you later what I'm doing. So then we define another field there you go, and then end of this. And then I declare a working area for that internal table. So working area, just going to name it like this: WPGMI, like line of IPGMI. Now I'm going to prepare a screen with 3 blocks of selection screens. So my first block of my selection screen is going to be selection screen. I use begin off block B1 with frame, title, text, T01. Now, inside the first block, I'm going to include a select options with obligatory parameters. So I start by typing select options PRGRP. It's going to be the name for of the parameter PGMI. I'm just following standard field names. That's why I'm using all these weird names. But you'll get used of using these names when you start using SAP. And then to make it obligatory, I use the ABAP keyword obligatory. And then I'm going to include this other keyword, modif ID. So I can associate this select option with a modifier ID. So the ID is going to be called OB. Now I'm going to include parameters also inside this selection screen. I'm going to declare another parameter works like mark works default, and I'm going to specify a default value for the works or the center. It's going to be 2000 just to specify a value. And I'm going to define some radio buttons. So how do we define radio buttons? So we use a variable S1 and we use radio button group G1. So the S1 is going to be each radio button, and I need to associate each radio button to a group because normally our radio buttons are grouped. So I'm going to declare 3 radio buttons, all associated to the same group. And selection screen, end of block B1. So I have my first block. I save my program, check my syntax, everything is okay, and I need to create this title. I need a title for my block, so I'm going to create the text symbol block 1 and I'm going to activate. I go back and now I activate my program and I run it. So as you can see, the first block is this one, block 1, and I included a select options with the obligatory parameter that you need to fill in order to continue. As you can see, it stops me the system from going on because I need to fill all required entry fields. And I have my 3 radio buttons. So let's go back and let's complete these 2 selection texts with material and center, and then we're going to call this radio 1 for the first radio button, radio 2 and radio 3, and I activate my selection text. Run one more time, and now I have material, center, radio 1, radio 2, and radio 3. So that's how you can build radio buttons and specify obligatory parameters. Now I'm going to build another block. B2 with another title, with frame, title, text, T02. and I'm going to define more radio buttons in this second block. So as parameters, I define the fourth radio button, but this is going to belong to group 2, and this one, radio button, it's going to belong to group 2, and selection screen and of block B2. So now I have my second block, and I'm going to define another block. So I'm going to start with selection screen, begin of block B3 with frame title text T03. I'm going to define more radio buttons here. Later on you're going to understand why I'm defining so many radio buttons. We're going to have a use for each one. So I define another radio button to group 3, and we're going to assign a user command, even though we don't need it all the time. I'm going to assign it this time. And then another radio button. Now inside this selection screen we're also going to define checkboxes. So how do we define checkboxes? So we want all the checkboxes in a line, so we're going to use the command selection screen begin of line. Inside this I'm going to write the parameter p checkbox 1. This is going to be the first parameter as checkbox, and then I'm going to assign an ID modifier SL. Then I'm going to define a screen text for this checkbox. So how do I do that? I use selection screen comment, and then I specify where do I want my comment. Those are the numbers I'm specifying, and then a text for this, and then an modifier ID S1 also. I define another parameter and another comment. This is going to be at position 27. It's going to take 20 positions, this text, which I also assign a modifier ID the same as SL, sorry. Now I define a third with a comment also. That is going to start at position 51 and it's going to take 20 spaces, and it's also going to be assigned a modifier ID. And then I have the end of line. Remember, I started the line. And then I have the selection screen end of block. Remember, I started the block 3. So I save, check my syntax, and I have an error, I correct it. and I activate. And I define my screen text. Remember, I built some screen text, so this is going to be checkbox 1. Copy that and paste it. To their corresponding IDs. I activate my text elements and I go back. So instead of naming this parameter, we're creating the screen text using ABAP code, using the comment ABAP keyword. And we also need to create the text elements for the other radio buttons. So we have here radio 4, 5, 6, and 7, and we activate. Remember this, we don't name them because we already defined using the ABAP keyword comment the title for each of this one. So let's go back and let's run. So now we have, oh, we forgot to define the titles. Remember, title 2 is block 2 and title 3 is block 3. Activate, go back and run. So now we have 3 blocks, block 1, block 2, block 3, radio buttons in each of these and check boxes in each of these. As you can see, and whenever I perform an action, the system thinks I'm trying to leave the screen and then ask me for the required field. I'm going to type 1 here so it lets me move on. So now we're going to define some buttons in this bar that can perform an action, and we're going to disable radio button 5, and when we alternate between radio button 6 and 7, we're going to hide and show these 3 checkboxes. So how do we do that? So once we have our screen, I'm going to use a type pools and define the icon so I can use the icons. And then I'm going to declare another data. There is going to be the function code. So func text for the buttons, type smp din txt. It's the standard type. So how do we add the buttons to the screen? So we do that by writing selection screen 2 points function key 1 and function key 2. That way I define 2 buttons. Now remember the events, right? So in my initialization event, I'm going to initialize radio button 7 marked. So I do that by specifying that with an X. Now for the func text dash icon ID, I'm going to assign the icon alarm to assign a little icon. This is a structure. This is a type structure, the func txt. So I assign an icon, then I also want to assign a quick info for this button, so it's going to be alarm. and also I can define a text for the icon. Let's call it alarm also. Now for the screen fields, for the elements, we use our table SSCR fields to define the function code. So func text _1, we assign all the structure that we just defined. And for the second one, we can just assign a title, just button 2 for example. Now, at my selection screen, at my selection screen event, we're going to perform a subroutine that is going to be called check radio. That this routine is going to check which radio button was selected. So I double click to create this subroutine in the main program. And now inside the check radio, I want to check which radio buttons are selected in the screen. How do I do that? I have to create a loop at screen. So I loop at all the different elements in the screen. If I have 10 radio buttons, I'm going to loop through 10 items on this loop. So I'm going to ask, first I'm going to hide or show an object. So I'm going to start with an if radio button 6 is selected or it is marked. Then if that is true, if the screen group 1 equals SL, remember I defined this modifier ID, so if we are looping through and the loop is going through that specific item that has group SL, we're going to show it. So screen active is to show, and we're going to assign a 1 to show. Then we're going to write an else if the radio button 7 is the one that is marked on the screen. Then if the screen group equals the same one, then we're going to hide those radio buttons. For that we use 0. Now, we're going to display blue colored parameters. How do we do that? So if we are looping through the screen and if the screen group is the other modifier we had, remember we defined another modifier that it was called OB for the select options, then we're going to use the property screen intensify to show a blue color. We define 1. And finally we're going to disable an object. So if we're looping through the screen and our screen name is S5, or we are looping through the radio button number 5, that's what the property name is used for, to specify the name of the screen element. Then the screen input is used as a property to specify that no input is possible on that radio button. And after we do that, if anything of that is done, then we have to modify the screen. Remember always to use this modify screen syntax. Then we have that. And then at the start of selection, that is when we execute the program, we're going to perform some get data subroutine that doesn't exist. We're just going to create it. And for this example, we are just gonna leave it blank, but here we have to add code to select data. Now that we have all these, let's check the syntax, activate, and run our program. So now, as you can see, all of our blocks were created, the 3 blocks with the check buttons. Then we have 2 buttons, alarm 1, which we added the icon, remember, and button 2. If we press this, and remember to fill all the required fields, so we still need to add some function to these buttons. So how do we do that? So we have to add another event. So I have a mistake here, I'm sorry. At selection screen output, so every time there's an output at the selection screen, we perform this. Then before that, we can also specify the at selection screen event. So there we're going to write a case for our function codes. So if we have our function code 1, this is the standard function code added to selection screens, then we're going to display a confirmation pop-up window, or we're going to display a message. And if it is the other button or function code 2, then we're just going to display a message button 2. So remember, at selection screen, that is when we are in the selection screen, this controls all the events that happen when we are in the selection screen, and the selection screen output controls the events that happen at the output of the selection screen, and that will be the check radio perform. So we activate, and now we run. Now as you can see, at the output, our radio button 5 is not enabled, so it is only read only. Remember, we do that by using the screen element input property, the input property. What about the radio 6 and radio 7? Remember, we always need to fill this. So this alternates. If we select radio 7, it hides the checkboxes. If we select radio 6, it shows the checkboxes. And these buttons have their corresponding functions assigned. If I press the alarm button message shows, and if I press the button 2, the button 2 message shows. So you can use all these options to create more complex selection screens for your requirements.